So just to start, has any question or any theme come up for anybody? You think anything that stands out or something like that? Yep.
Well, there was one thing that's sort of percolating a little bit with another group, and it's sort of what I joked about with Michelle just now.
Yeah.
And that is renunciation. Ultimate renunciation, does it result in silence and not using words?
Absolutely.
At all?
Not according
Certainly
to,
not.
Not according to Dayananda. No. Okay, that's a good point, right? In the spiritual world, there's a lot of this thing of silence, right? Now, there's the contraries of human experience, noise and silence, if you know what I mean. So the absence of noise, right? But when we're talking about the silence of being, we're not talking about the silence of being embraces both contraries.
Mm-hmm.
So being doesn't disappear because there's noise, and it doesn't disappear, doesn't become, it's not more present when there's silence. So for example, the idea that I can only be myself when I'm sitting quietly, and admittedly, when you're with yourself sitting quietly, it might be more conducive to simply being yourself, right? But the whole point with Vedanta is freedom while living. So while being engaged in this action of living, right, we abide in silence. Now, that's in the presence of noises externally. It's in the presence of silence externally. It's in the presence of thoughts happening in my mind or thoughts not happening in my mind. It's actually distinct from the movement of appearances. So being is an element. It's not even an element because it's not. The thing about being is that it can never become an object to you, actually. Because you only appreciate being when you're being. Have you noticed that? You know what I mean? So our and what we want to do, don't we? We want to, our spirituality and our daily living are not two different things when we are practicing karma yoga in the sense that Swami Dayananda means it. So my daily life is my spiritual practice. There's not two entities. Have you ever seen people that split? You know, they've got their daily life and their relationships and their work, and then they've got their spiritual religion. Or have you seen that? Have you seen that rupture?
That's called my life, actually.
Yeah, well, there's a problem with that. Yeah. And the other problem is, of course, we're brought up in this strange culture now where what Dayananda says, you know, when we just come back to ourselves as we are, he said when we start to feel uneasy, it's, we feel a little bit disconcerted because our whole culture is based on stimulation and excitement. Have you noticed that? You know, and so I don't know whether some of you people will remember this. Before TV, you know, we used to play cards. We didn't have the electronic stimulation. We didn't have, even in the communities, the basic communities in New Zealand, we'd come together and play euchre. I don't know whether it was like 500, So what happened was there was a more communal, so it wasn't this absolute demand for more excitement. Now, I'm not a moralist, but now the movies, unless they got intense violence, intense sex, intensely stimulating, in order for people to feel alive, they have to have more external stimulation, and it becomes a kind of an addiction. And so just to simply remain and be, like, excuse me, why would we want to do that? That's not exciting. Hey, you boring or what? Okay, now, the thing is that in this type of environment where people feel dead inside, actually, if you hear, who's ever been in a noisy factory that after a while you don't even feel it, you don't hear the noise? Well, our culture is very similar now. It's very loud, and so what happens is we become desensitized. And if we're desensitized, we need more stimulation to feel alive. And so, and also we have this, a situation where communal bonds are not formed. If I sat like this for 5 hours, right? Most people would clinically say I had catatonia or something. But when people are absorbed in TV or whatever, that's what's happening. So the thing is that what happens with these young children, there's a whole new generation. You see, when Freud was alive, the family was the primary influence. In other words, the family was the microcosm of the culture, and what its job was to introduce the child into social life, so they learn, how to be polite and stuff like that, and not to pass wind and not to belch, and they learn how to, if they're Eskimos, they learn how to belch, depending on the culture, but they learn how to fit into the culture and how to engage in communal life. And the family used to be the greatest influence in it. Now, the TV and stuff, they become a major form of forming the character of the child. We don't really know what the effects of this are. Well, we do in a funny sense. If you look at the younger people, this obsession with fame, I want to be famous, I want to be somebody, I want to feel good about myself. Have you heard all this stuff? I mean, I'm sure it's always been that way, but not to the way it is now. So one of the great problems is that if I think that happiness is stimulation, if I think happiness is feeling good, I'm gonna seriously miss the mark. In the Christian tradition, do you know what sin means? In Greek,
missing the mark.
Missing the mark. I'm gonna be misaligned. I'm not going to be heading towards. So for Swami Dayananda, the whole point is learning what it means to be. Learning what it means to be, not to get something or to have something, not necessarily even to do something, but learning what it means to be. Now, the basis of his teaching, or the starting point of his teaching, isn't the human being, it's really in one sense God. Okay, so the starting of Dayananda's teaching is that the life, light and fullness that is God is abidingly present and is not away from any aspect of your experience. Are we clear on that? Okay, so, and we can talk about God as being, as reality. We can talk about God, metaphorically as our father, our father, mother, or whatever. It's not really that important in that sense. But the most important thing is, for human beings, is that we are already, as we are, embraced by this wisdom compassion that's continually embracing us. And we can really see this when we look at it, when we look at being, because For Dayananda, being is a synonym for God. They're not two different things. And so what we might do today is look at this whole idea of being and what brings about an appreciation of being, what brings about a recognition of that. Now, how many people here have sometimes heard people talk as if awareness, the light of awareness, or the light that is God, right, is my awareness? I'm being aware. It's mine. As if awareness was my function. Who's ever seen people talk that way? Of course they do. They say it's my awareness. And then if it's my awareness, then of course I have to keep it up because it's something that I'm doing. Okay? And these days, who's ever been familiar with this thing of mindfulness now, practicing mindfulness? You ever heard of this? I think it's quite a big thing in Australia. So I just want to give you, for Swami Dayananda, his whole question was what? He would never ask why. Why did God create the world? Or why, why is this, why that? His whole thing is what? What is God? What is God? And so, because of that, what I want you to notice is that when we're talking about the light of awareness or the light of Isvarra, basically it's continually shining, and it's only in that light do we see. Now, if you just if you just stand back now and just pause, what you'll notice is, so I want you to turn your face to an object, and I want you to close your eyes first of all. Just turn your face to an object, close your eyes, and then I'm going to give you an instruction. Now what I want you to do is open your eyes now, but don't see what's in front of you. Go. You can't do it. Because the light of awareness is continually revealing what is. Okay, it's revealing whatever's here. And in that light, you see clearly. But that's provided that you are rooted in the light of awareness. Because otherwise, you will be looking at your thoughts about what you're seeing. All right, so when people think about themselves, who here has ever thought about themselves and felt bad? Who's ever thought about themselves and felt bad? Now, what we're looking at here is you're not looking at yourself. What you've done is your mind has automatically formed an idea of yourself as bad or as hopeless or as lonely or as stupid or whatever all of the other self-designations that we have, or maybe magnificent, terrific. It's all the same. And so I make myself an object, and then I look at this object and I go, oh God, or I go, look at this object and go, am I good or am I good? It doesn't matter, but I am not looking at myself. I'm actually completely and utterly enclosed in what Dayananda calls my world. I'm involved with myself. Okay, I'm involved with myself. Who's ever heard of the word egocentric? It's centered on self. Who's ever heard of the word altruistic? Altruistic. The word altruistic means other. Other. Not myself. So how important do you think it is that we actually come into relationship with the world as it is? How important is that? It's extremely important, because when I'm in the world as it is, I'm related, aren't I? I'm in relationship to what Swami Dayananda calls, I come into relationship with Isvarra. Because Isvarra is God in the form of this manifest universe. You see. Okay? Are we clear on that? Now, So when I'm caught up in myself, I'm having a dream about myself. It's like I'm dreaming. Do you know what I mean? Like when I'm looking at a snake, I'm not looking at a snake instead of a rope. I'm looking at a concept, an idea that there is a snake over there. And then I'm seeing the snake. So I'm not alive to facts, am I? I'm actually, you see, when I look at a tree, the tree exists independently of my mind. Because it's actually there, I am seeing it. Dayananda's definition of objectivity. But when I'm being subjective, I'm caught up in myself. But I think that I'm looking out. I think that what I'm looking at is independent of my mind. But that's what we call subjectivity. And for Dayananda, he says the primary factor at the beginning, the primary issue is the reduction of subjectivity. Okay? Of course, the problem is we don't recognize subjectivity as subjectivity. When I'm angry with my wife and I just know that it's her who's upsetting me, I just know that, I'm not actually alive to facts. I don't know that actually, but I think I do. Who's ever had the idea or the impression that they know why they're upset? Who's ever had that experience? I know why I'm upset. No, you don't. It's just not true. You see, from Dayananda's point of view, the meaning of your suffering is you've fallen away from reality. Always. So the meaning of human suffering is that we're cut off from God. It doesn't appear that way often, would you agree? But this is the reality. So in the vision of Vedanta, when we're actually abiding in that vision and we see ourselves getting caught up and angry, we go, oh, hold a minute. And when that vision obtains in us, suddenly we go, and we come back. Does that make sense? We no longer are blaming the wife for our suffering, because that instant, that wisdom has come alive in us and it's telling us, there you go again, Bede, you're cut off from God. So the very meaning of your experience is now different in the light of wisdom. Does that make sense? And wisdom is dynamic. It actually affects how you are. So here I am, I'm arguing with Sylvia and I'm just convinced that it's her that's wrong and all of that stuff, and she's making me upset, and then suddenly, right in the middle of it, who's ever had that, wisdom comes in, it sort of scoops you up, and you're suddenly realizing that you're just being an idiot. Who's ever had that experience? Because that's the light of wisdom obtaining in you, and the very fact that it stops, takes the wind out of your sails, means that you're being governed by wisdom. And the very interesting thing about wisdom, it's not me and my wisdom. It's me living the wisdom. In other words, I am seeing through the eyes of wisdom. So wisdom is the presence of God in the form of a way of seeing which has been given to me. And that way of seeing lifts me out of reactivity. Are we clear here? If you're Christian, it's quite common. They talk about the incarnation, God being incarnated and all that stuff, becoming embodied in the world. So the thing is that we really do need wisdom. Wisdom, because you see, normally what happens is that we depend upon our thinking. So we think that our thinking is true and right. When wisdom obtains in us, it takes the place of our thinking. Does that make sense? It takes the place. And so spiritual wisdom says to us, when we understand the fact that we are always embraced by the love that is God. Okay, we just take that wisdom. Now, when I actually am appreciating that fact, I am being wise. Now, I'm never going to arrive at the reality of God through empirical evidence, which is what's now demanded. The rather hardline militant atheism we see these days amongst the intellectuals. Have you noticed it? It's just heavy. And then they have a means of knowledge called empiricism, where you look out and you go, is this true? And you look with your senses, you go, is this true? But empirical evidence is only good for empirical things, right? So this understanding that we are continually embraced by the love that is God. Now, some theologians or some religious people will say, yes, we are, unless we're sinning. Have you heard that one? That they think that God gets pissed off with us, right? Now, you think about this. If God is what St. John says, God is love. If God is love, and I do a finite act, in other words, I commit adultery, or I steal money, or I do something that is really bad, right? Does that finite act change the nature of what God is? Can't. Does it make sense? It can't. But what happens is, I might, when I'm lost in ignorance, from my side of the fence, I'm cut off from God. And that's hell, by the way. It's very punishing being cut off from God. Not that God punishes, because God is this benevolent, it's appreciated existentially as this benevolent presence that's always embracing us. And the thing that how Swami Dayananda sees God is life itself, real life. And the thing is that when we are actually in the present moment partaking in that life, being that life that is God, if you like, we find a great release psychologically. And so Dayananda's teaching is all about, so here we are, that we are embraced by this life, which is also light. In other words, it's a revealing light. And thank God it's a revealing light. Who here has sometimes, they've done something, they know it's wrong, and something just, even if they didn't like it, something tells them that what you have done is unloving and wrong. Who's ever had that experience? Now, remorse and regret is a good thing. It helps us correct our behavior. If we didn't have remorse and regret, we'd be sociopathic. Do you see what I mean? So what we're looking at is we want to learn what it means to find refuge or relax into the very lap that has got the lap. Dayananda, it's a metaphor. God obviously hasn't got a lap, but you imagine a lap, and you imagine a little baby just putting their head and just, you imagine that, just, okay, that resting in the lap. What he means is, you can actually rest, if you want to put it more philosophically, you can rest in the presence of being, or in the presence of reality, right? Now, what does he mean by the presence of reality? Does he mean some esoteric, theoretical thing? Absolutely not. He's talking about resting in the presence of the given, whatever that given is. Now, one of the things, so for Dayananda, God is the life, light, and fullness. Okay, that's what God is. And everything we're looking at is a manifestation of that. And that is a little bit like, when you're looking at an ocean, are you looking at water? You are. Do you cease looking at water because the ocean gets rough and ugly? You don't, do you? Basically, those waves depend upon water for their existence, and so do the smooth waves. So just the same, that this light of awareness is continually shining. Now we can see this. So if you're just sitting here by yourself, now what I want you to do is this. I want you to come back simply to the feeling of yourself. Not the thought of yourself, but the feeling of yourself as given. Because it's there, you see it. So when you're sitting here, I'm an individual. I'm not going to go, oh, I'm Sat Chitananda and all that stuff. I just not into it, right? But so I'm going to come back to the actual feel of my life and being that's here. And I'm not going to try and find some spiritual thing. I'm just going to come back to the actual feel of myself as what I'm like right here. And I'm just going to remain quietly for 30 seconds. Can we do that, please? We're just going to be with ourselves as we are like, as we are. Okay. Now, can you put up your hands when I'm asking these questions so I know that you're tracking with me? Who noticed that you, without any will on your part, you came aware of the sounds and the sensations that were happening around you? Who noticed that? Did you notice that, Amelia? I can't hear you.
I feel tired, so I tried to embrace that.
Good. So you come alive to the fact of the sensation of tiredness.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know whether you raised your hand because I can only see you from your nose up, Amelia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Is that better?
Yeah. So what happens is the light of awareness was revealing your tiredness, wasn't it, Amelia?
Yes.
You weren't trying. Did you produce the tiredness, or was it just because it's there you're seeing it?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Because it was there, you were seeing it.
Yes.
Right? So you were being alive. That's what Dayananda means by being alive to facts. So now what's interesting is this. The only way you can come back to yourself as you are is in the light of awareness. Right? That's the only way, because the light of awareness is continually shining, and you can only see facts, be alive to facts in that light. But you don't do it. You don't do awareness. You don't even keep it up. It's always embracing you. Now, this gets very interesting. This gets very, very interesting. In our Western scriptures, I think it was King David said, ask the Lord, please search me. Right? Search me. The thing is, there are many times that we find ourselves in what we're feeling very objectionable. Who's ever done that? Who's ever felt that sometimes, that you find your experience of yourself exceedingly unpleasant? Who's ever had that? Right? And what I used to do is when that happened, I would go, oh my God, and I'd start doing something about it, of course. I become a thinker and doer in relation to my state. Now, in terms of my action, it's very good for me to be a thinker and a doer. Do you know what I mean? My wife is sick at the moment. She's got a headache. I'll go and ask her whether to make a cup of coffee. Would you like a cup of coffee, darling? Go get the coffee or whatever. So I'm thinking and I'm doing. Very good. Right? Now, but when it comes to my states, the state that I'm in, what we want to do is that I want you to imagine that God is like the sun, and we're dark and cold and miserable. Right? Right? Now, because we're cut off from the sun, and when you're cut off from the sun, two things happen: you're cold and miserable, and you're in darkness. Would that be true? Now, what happens is, when we get even near ourselves, if we're in pain, or we feel the depth of loneliness, or we feel antagonistic or empty or afraid, it's very understandable, isn't it, that we want to keep away from that. But it's very understandable. The problem is the light of awareness never lets us go, in a sense. It's continually showing us as we're like. And so when we remain with ourselves helplessly as we are, the very first thing is I can't possibly be aware of myself and my helplessness without this light of awareness. My helplessness is being revealed. My state is being revealed by this light of awareness. Now, if I remain with myself as I am, what happens is, do you see what's happening? There is a self-revelation going on. In the light of awareness, I am revealed. Every little nook and cranny of me is being revealed. Now, this is actually a good thing, because the thing is that the light, as it penetrates into you, you start to get melted as personality. Are we clear? As personality, as this suffering, uptight, angry person, you start to be melted or evaporated, or the darkness that you're being gets resolved in this light. Does this make sense? So this has got nothing to do with self-improvement. It is all based on our understanding of God, and our understanding that if we want to resolve our suffering, this suffering must be resolved into Isvarra, or into God. That's what Dayananda called it, right? So here I am. Do you notice that as soon as I remain with myself as I am, what happens to that inward split of one part of you hating and fighting the other part? What happens to it?
It disappears.
Goes away, doesn't it? And
yeah.
Because self-dissatisfaction is a dualism. But when I remain with myself as I am, and we can put this in religious language, we don't have to, but I will, because I've got religious connotations. Literally what's happening is, at any one moment, I can come to God as I am. Now, I can only do that in the light of awareness. Are you clear on this? Because the light of awareness is the only thing that's going to reveal me as I am. So, how many people have had these ideas like, you shouldn't be judgmental, and you shouldn't be angry, and you should be happy, and you should be blissed out, and you should be, who's ever suffered from that sort of nonsense, right? Now, the thing is, what if the fact is I am judgmental, and I'm asserting rightness, and I'm just totally pissed? What if that's the fact? Now, what normally happens is people are going, okay, I shouldn't be like that. Okay, I'm going to think nice thoughts, right? Who's ever tried to fix themselves, what they're being? Now, I'm not talking about conduct. We always need to up our game in terms of conduct. But isn't it a wonderful thing to know that you can come to God exactly as you are? And you need to come to, the spiritual understanding tells you this. You need to come to God exactly as you are. In other words, you have to be willing to be revealed. Does that make sense? Willing to be just simply let this light reveal you. And as you do it, you know, sure, it might even get worse. The experience might get worse, but that's all that's happening is as this light penetrates the different nooks and crannies, the dark aspects of the unconscious, all of this sort of stuff that Freud talked about. What happens is, as it comes up into the light, guess what happens to it? It gets melted. Does that make sense? All you're doing is you're waiting. Because you have a spiritual understanding that it's important to remain truthfully what you are, come to God exactly as you are, place yourself in His hands, and then just simply leave it up to Him. And the fact of the matter is, this light of awareness has a dynamic effect on us as human beings. In its presence, darkness goes away. It doesn't get pushed away. It actually goes away. Because Dayananda says that error is an experience. You know why it's so good that our unhappiness is an experience? Experiences can come and go. This light of awareness can't come and go. Try and get away from it. Okay, try not to let the light of awareness shine right now, please. It's not possible. So when we talk about being prayerful, when we talk about remaining with ourselves, we're not practicing. What we're doing is we're abiding in an appreciation or a recognition of what God is. So we're living an understanding. We know that, the only thing that resolves my agony, my pain, my psychological suffering, all of that stuff, the self-dissatisfaction, is appreciating this embrace of this life and light. And what it does is this light and light operates on you, and it draws you into this attitude called graceful acceptance. You don't do graceful acceptance. You find yourself being gracefully accepting. Are you with me? It's not that I'm going to accept people. Who's ever tried this thing? I'm going to try and accept people. But what if you're unaccepting? Then you come as unaccepting. You come as an unaccepting, resisting person. You don't resist the resisting, because you create another problem. But through spiritual understanding, we know we can just remain as we are, no longer in conflict with ourselves, and we simply let that light of awareness penetrate us and leave it up. You don't have to worry about that. It'll look after itself. You don't have to worry about that. And so what happens is, and you get existential verification, because as you get drawn into being more and more accepting, guess what happens to all the resistance? It goes away, and you find yourself being accepting. Being accepting. But what's really interesting, in that very acceptance, you find yourself alive to facts. You can't help it. And so what happened at the beginning? The beginning of the process was accepting. You're accepting yourself as you are. Okay. Now you might be composed, free, and at home with yourself, but you're still being accepting from the beginning to the end. But what's happened is, what's transformed you, because you see, it's the presence of God appreciated that is the transformative factor. Nothing you can do. Are we clear on that? We think we can do stuff. How many people here have thought you can? You know what Dayananda says, you can never replace prayer. Why did he say that? Why did he say you can never replace prayer with a technique? Why did he say you can never replace prayer with a technique? Because prayer is based on an understanding, isn't it? Does that make sense? You turn as you are, you place yourself in God's hands, and you wait. You are being prayerful. It's what he called a prayerful attitude. And he said a prayerful attitude is the understanding that everything is given, everything, and awareness of the presence of the giver. And the interesting thing is that as you're drawn into this acceptance, you find that you are trusting. It's not that I've got trust. Even the very state or existential condition of trusting is the presence of God obtaining in you as a trust, as trusting. So this attitude, in this attitude of graceful acceptance, this attitude is what he says is born out of the understanding of God. In other words, your life as an accepting person comes from reality. It doesn't come from your past experiences. Are you all clear on that? That's why it's so liberating. Our normal experience of ourself is based on psychological reactions that have been built into us in the past and they're becoming active and dominating us in the present. Does that make sense? That's the whole egoic life. But what we're talking about here, and we're not talking about anything exciting. We are just simply, so, you know, you can be having a cup of coffee. It gives me an excuse to finish my coffee. You can be quietly having a cup of coffee. But this accepting is just so important because it gives you your measure. You see, what you're going to find is that once you know what it means to be resting in Isvarra's lap, suddenly what you will find, you see, this graceful acceptance that they talk about in the Gita, this is the one attitude that can face every experience that we meet. The more we become familiar with this attitude, we face ourselves like this, we face others like this, and we face the world like this. Are we clear? Now, when I find myself being disturbed, which I will do, in fact, you'll be more even sensitive to it. You know, like you might be walking down the road and you suddenly realize that you're just being a little bit niggly. Who's ever felt that? You know, you're just walking down the road and just feeling a little bit niggly. Fantastic. That is the presence of God revealing that you're being niggly. Does that make sense? And you go, ah! So instead of doing some operation on yourself, some self-improvement nonsense, you'll go, ah! And you will just simply settle in and you'll wait. Does that make sense? And then you might arrive at that point where you're just simply at home with yourself. By the way, you can't be at home with yourself without being at home with God, by the way, in God, right? That's not possible. This thing of I'm comfortable in myself. Well, good luck. So what happens is, what happens is your practice, if you like, is remaining the same, because in this graceful acceptance, you will find that you are being the same. You're being gracefully accepting in the face of thoughts and feelings, being graceful in the acceptance of what your spouse says and does, and you're being gracefully accepting in the conditions that you're in. Does that make sense? Doesn't mean you approve. Doesn't mean what you're looking at you approve of. It means that your way of being is that you are not resisting it and you're alive to what is. You don't have to like it. And you just accept the fact you don't like it. Are we clear here? So this is a new way of being in the world that comes from reality. That's why in our Western scriptures we talk about being a holy offspring of God. When our sense of life and being comes from God, we're a holy offspring of God, aren't we? Okay. What were you going to say, Robert?
Just that eventually in life, eventually there's going to be a response. There's going to be a conduct that's expressed. And
so Swami Dayananda would say that graceful acceptance puts you in the world as it is, and that's the basis of responding. That if
right.
if you're not in the world as it is, you can't respond, you just react. He even
Right.
puts it this way. He even puts it this way. He says, Isvarra makes the decision.
So, but the way you're going to respond is in part going to be shaped. Well, first of all, there's no disagreement. I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. So this is not something to modify anything that's been said. It's just, I guess, let me say it as a question.
Yep.
On the one hand, we can talk about it as just Isvarra responding, but on the other hand, we can talk about it in terms of you as an individual responding based on your on the principles and the scriptural study that you've gone through.
No, I'm not talking about that. No. Let's get this clear. No. The scriptures for Dayananda bring about a wisdom that you can live. So the fact of the matter, the scripture might say that God is ever present, right? That's the idea. When I see that fact, I'm abiding in a vision, I'm living that vision.
Okay, so you never reach thought at all. You never reach your past.
You have thought, but what I'm saying is there's a difference between. Do you know that sociopaths and politicians are normally good communicators? Did you know that?
Okay.
But they're not necessarily rooted in this existential way of being called graceful acceptance, which is born out of the understanding of God. So both people can be nice and polite, right? But their being is different. So we're talking, and we're not talking about becoming mindless. Within graceful acceptance, you think and you act.
Right. Well, that's all I think that's all I wanted to point to.
But without graceful acceptance, you can be thinking and acting, but there's no graceful acceptance, which means there's no aliveness to facts, and which your sense of identity is based on past experience.
Okay.
In graceful acceptance, your sense of identity comes from reality. Judy?
Thank you.
I just want to clarify something. Okay, so if you're alive to facts at that moment, whatever's arising, there's a response to it. You have no control over the response.
Yes, you've got no, that's not true.
Well,
no.
Wait a minute. I meant if it's cold and my body responds with chills, I have no response. I have no control over that. However, I have the control to go get a coat.
Yes.
Okay, but I don't have a control over what my body is physiologically.
That's a normal reaction. You're having a physiological reaction. You are having one.
Yes, I'm having one.
Sometimes you can become that and you go, oh, I'm cold, and your sense of identity and the feeling of cold is one and the same. Sometimes.
Well, no, what happens is, I'm just trying to clarify here. What happens is the cold, instead of just the fact is it's cold, get the coat. Instead, it shouldn't be cold. It's somebody's fault it's cold. Who didn't pay the bill? What's going on? Whatever it is. Okay?
Whatever,
That's the not being alive to facts.
That's our psychological, us becoming our psychological reactions. There's a difference between having a psychological reaction that you're alive to, like I'm enraged because you've said something. I'm not denying. We don't want to get into denial for spiritual reasons.
Right. No. I mean, I can be uncomfortable.
I'm agreeing with you, Judy. The fact of the matter is that what sameness is being alive to facts. That's what remains the same. Being the aliveness to facts, which you can't be alive to facts without being accepting. When there's any resistance, the basis of reaction is non-acceptance of a fact. So all psychological reactions, the basis of them is resistance. That is why in acceptance, the psychological reactions fall away. Being the psychological reactions falls away.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so what we're talking about here is that our daily practice, once we know what this attitude feels like, does that make sense? We know that it's, you're not pushing against anything, you're at home with yourself, it's not an exciting experience, but it's peaceful. It's devoid of friction or conflict. Then you can become very sensitive, can't you, when you fall away from that, which you will do. Now we can start to really engage in a spiritual practice. It's cognitive all the way that I've noticed I've fallen away from that composure and that being at home with myself. Problem, I've fallen away from being rooted in God. Solution, I just remain as I am and I turn to God as I am and I wait. And I'm waiting even when I'm doing the dishes. Who's ever done the dishes thinking, I don't want to do these bloody dishes, right? Right? It's a great moment to go, okay, I'm going to find my right place while I'm doing the dishes. You can actually, I'm just going to settle into God while I do the dishes. You know what I mean? So you're not resisting yourself. You're not giving yourself a hard time because you're niggly, but you're just simply alive to the fact that you're niggly and you're remaining with yourself as you're doing the dishes. You will find that you can arrive at that point where you're just simply doing the dishes without resistance. Does that make sense? So this is the practice of karma yoga, learning to remain the same in the face of changing experiences. All right? And the whole point with this is then I'm using my daily life. I don't have to unearth my psychological darkness and all that stuff. Don't worry. Life will trigger it for you. Believe me. You don't have to worry about that. All right? But as it comes up, you resolve it. As it comes up, you resolve it. So this resolving the ego into Isvarra is a moment-by-moment thing. So I'm either with myself quietly as I'm doing the dishes. I'm with myself quietly. What's wrong with being... Yeah, but well, why would you want to be quietly with yourself? That's very boring. Of course it's boring. Okay? But it's not... Being peaceful is not boring. Does that make sense? But it's not exciting. All right? Now, so just so I know. So, Bob, what, as a result of what we've been talking about, what's sort of clearer?
Well, just what life looks like when we're hearing these words, and what life would look like if we're really assimilating the knowledge you're describing.
Yeah, what we want to do is we want to live the attitude of graceful acceptance. Once we know what it is, once we know what it means, we can live it. We establish ourselves in graceful acceptance by being gracefully accepting. But it doesn't come from us. It's an understanding. You don't make yourself gracefully accepting. The moment you stop your resistance and you remain as you are, the presence of reality will become very evident. It's as if it comes in, takes you up, and lifts you out of your identification.
By the way, it also, thank you. It also reminds me something that Schwartz recently wrote about how it's better when things leave you than when you leave things.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. Kevin.
Yeah.
Can I just ask the question about what you mean by cognitive all the way? Is that just I see that I'm upset, there's an understanding that means I'm cut off from God. So it's not like it's just cognitive. I'm seeing things, appearances are coming, and as an understanding of what they mean, but I'm not figuring it out in any intellect with
my spiritual understanding tells me that the presence of God appreciated will draw me into God, And as he draws me into himself, I become relaxed. I become accepting. And so the whole thing is understanding. I'm not trying to remain the same or any of that stuff. I just understand that the presence of God appreciated is the transformative factor. The very fact that I'm like this and I'm aware that I'm like this, that's wonderful, because that's the presence of the light of God showing me I'm like that. And then I wait as that, and I let the presence of God operate on me, gather me up and draw me to itself. And the whole process is understanding. It's not like I'm going to try and do something about myself. It's more like I'm in the cold room, I prefer to be in the warm room. And I understand with my wisdom how to get back to the warm room in trust. Remain as I am and let the activity of God in my life draw me out of it. Okay? So it's wisdom. Okay?
Yeah.
Judy.
I liked what is God? What is God rather than the whys? And also for me is this recognition that there's so many ways things can play out. And it's not for me to determine how they play out. There's not even a me that can manipulate them turning out. That's a belief. That's not a truth.
Yeah.
And that only with residing with the facts can there be this opportunity to just unfold.
True, but you can respond, but you like what Dayananda says, you do the best you can.
It's because there's so much. No, but it's like before I used to have this idea somehow that if I tried hard enough, or this other angle, or this other possibility, or whatever, now it's sort of, if I am there and I am just allowing the facts to happen, things happen. I am doing, there's still things that, and I'll have proclivities and whatever, but as they arise, there's not this trying to manipulate or control. It's just they're flowing. They're gonna, and that's the freedom.
You are living peacefully with what is.
Right. It's this. It's a changing of it's like there's this whole different axis from which
it's all born out of the understanding of what Swami Dayananda means by God.
Yes.
That's the point. Very good. Andre. Oh, by the way, Judy, you see, what is God? What does it mean to rest in the lap? What is my suffering? These what questions are fantastic. They open our eyes.
Right. Whereas the why is almost demanding.
Crazy. Forget it.
Yeah, no, I know. But the what does open up possibilities. Absolutely. I like the what.
Why closes you down and makes you think you know stuff when you don't. Yeah. Andre.
I think Judy nails it today because, when I had tough time, and it somehow it feels like I'm trying to appreciate Isvarra, but it's not like that. It's appreciating like arises in me. It's not my doing.
No.
But it feels like I'm doing that. I do right thing. When I do right thing, it feels, now I'm doing. But when I falls away from Isvarra, it's my fault. And when I come back, it's my doing, but it's not my doing really.
Yes, that's right. Well,
and Judy nails it yet.
Yes. When you fall away, you are the location of the ignorance is you. It's not your fault as such, right? But as you're right, we actually don't know God. God knows us actually, and so Because when we're embraced by that light of awareness, we are being known, aren't we? And we, of course, we know in that light. In that light, we know. That's because most of the religious traditions say that God gives us his life as ours, but it's given. It's not a product of us. Very good, Andre. Michelle.
So wisdom is being with what is. That's what I got. That was the most important. And my personality, I see it more as a tool.
Yes.
Because I can't get rid of it, so might as well use it as best as I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my acceptance will be wisdom.
Yes, and the result of that wisdom is acceptance. When that wisdom is active in you, you are drawn into being accepting. Mm-hmm. It also might be quite useful to maybe talk about functional personality and egoic personality, because we need functional. We need, as an individual, we need to function.
Yeah, we need to function. Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Smita.
When we are practicing small chores at home or doing things mindfully with awareness, so that's the time when you're living that life of awareness. You're being aware of yourself, but in spite of doing something, you tend to fall away, drift away, and at that moment, if you're aware of it and you come back, so it's you reconnect, and you're with that light of awareness, and that brings you back to yourself.
Yes, and even the fact that you get lost, and then what it does is it solicits you, it wakes you up. Here you go. Hey, wait a minute. It actually, when the light of awareness becomes evident to you, it's this light calling you back to itself. So even that's Isvarra's action. And the thing is that what you'll notice is this: if you give emphasis not to being aware but being accepting, if you give emphasis to being accepting, you will find that you are being aware. Because in acceptance, the basis of reaction is gone. So you turn off reactions in acceptance. You don't have to worry about awareness, because that's your nature. You can't help but when you're being an aware, conscious person, that's what you are in the light of God. You can't help be that. You don't have to worry about that. So the emphasis is on accepting, actually. So let's say you're doing the dishes, you'll just sort of soften and you'll just remain with yourself as you are, accepting. The awareness will look after itself. That's where we're different from the Buddhists. Okay, we're not trying to be or keep something up. What we're doing is every time we notice resisting and not being non-accepting, we go, even the recognition that we're non-accepting comes from God. And then we just we cease to resist and we wait. We don't stop the feeling like this. We just wait there. We don't worry about that. We just let that be penetrated by the light of awareness, and that'll get resolved anyway. All right? Very good, Smita. Amelia.
I've seen this, of all places, in the line at the supermarket. Sometimes it appears as if the checkout person, the cashier, has an attitude, or you're waiting to be served and someone's taking all their time. And so you see a reaction to that, and the light of awareness comes in, and you can be untouched by that.
Yes.
I've seen that, and you have no idea why that lady is behaving that way. She may be tired, whatever. It doesn't matter. Right. But what I find then, when the light of awareness comes in, I can be still, and I can be untouched and say thank you in fullness. I can say thank you and let it go, not expect any response. But it seems to be a place where that practice can take place, coming into this light of awareness.
Yes, and taking refuge there, Amelia.
Taking
refuge there.
Yes.
Instead of taking refuge in changing the world or in the hope that, you know, people will be different, that you'll be different, or the world will be different, you take refuge in being. Or you take refuge in God. Much better. Because actually things external to you aren't much of a refuge. At best they can put things off. Yeah. Do you mean? Trying to find happiness and security in the world is a zero-sum game. It's going to always end badly. Do you know what I mean? You know how they talk about building your riches in heaven? You ever heard that one?
Yes.
It's a truism. Okay? So try this week. I want you to give emphasis to being accepting. I don't want you to give emphasis of being aware and you don't have to worry about the aware. That's not your job, being aware, right? But if you notice anytime you feel that, you know, that kind of feeling of pushing, you all know what I'm talking about here, that kind of like that resisting feeling, you know, it can be really slight or it can be really intense. It doesn't matter because they're all the same. The thing is that as soon as you notice that, just simply shift into that kind of, that feeling of acceptance. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean it's going to go straight away. You're not going to try and get rid of it. You're just going to remain with yourself as you are without doing anything about it. I'm not talking about conduct like doing the dishes. You keep doing the dishes, but you're not trying to do anything about your state. Yes, Judy?
I don't think Kevin got to say how this affected him today, unless I missed it and I went somewhere else. But okay. I don't think Kevin got to share.
Kevin, what did you notice when we did the exercise?
I just find quiet.
From my insensitivity.
No, I asked a question about cognitive all the way. Like there's lots of things. Like I think the core understanding here for me is that I can't do it with my thinking processes, and it's an understanding that God isn't away from anything. So even in the experience that I feel crap.
Yep.
Within that, if I try and struggle with that in my mind,
yes,
I will be going deeper and deeper into Pandora's box of that. There's no solution in that. No. But yet, if I'm through spiritual understanding,
yep,
just to wait and know that I'm constantly embraced by this wisdom, compassion, which allows them to see
yep,
what I previously thought was so real, my whole world.
Yes.
It's seen as just a passing notion that I took absolutely to be real and substantial. And yet when I with this, what St. Paul talks about, this faculty of spiritual discernment, that I can appreciate being, abide in being, and there can be thoughts, there can be anything going on, but I am silent.
Yes.
I am being silent in that.
Yes, even though the thoughts are agitated. So even when you're like this, you're silent in the face of it. Does that make sense? Because this is the world of appearances. And it's the presence of God appreciated that is the transformative factor.
And the other thing is, I've always found it very helpful. Andrew Murray, Waiting on God, a book he wrote. It's for free on the internet. You can expect to feel stuffed because if you've been cut off from God, when you at first you can expect to feel crappy.
Yes.
And just wait.
That's what Dayananda made. I used to think I had psychological problems, and then after listening to Dayananda, I realized that, okay, if I'm cut off from reality in God, I can't help but be miserable. It's not a psychological problem. It's a religious problem. Yeah. Very good. Robert, you were going to say something?
Well, fortunately, I had my mute button on, so it didn't come out. But what I was going to say was that what I said while my mute button was on.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Was how did you avoid not being a doormat? In other words, and again, the point.
This is based on a confusion of levels.
Right. No, the point is, I think
this is typical. This is a major spiritual confusion. In the functional world, I have to render to Caesar what's Caesar. I have to take care not of myself and others. That is in terms of conduct.
Right. No.
So
but I think I do appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that while you're engaged in being accepting, and that's the emphasis, I think the point will be that the effect is going to be that the person for whom you're, quote, being a doormat, just hear this, is going to maybe continue that behavior longer than if you quickly pointed out something because you were recognizing an inappropriate action on their part.
No,
I'm being really real.
Okay, it's a bad example, right? We're not talking about that at all, right?
Okay.
For example, acceptance puts me in the world as it is. I see an axe murderer is about to kill my daughter. I have a gun. Within that acceptance, I can pick up the gun and I can shoot the guy.
No, that's yeah. Okay.
The thing is, I'm not doing it out of hatred. I'm doing it out of what's needful. I may even hate the fact that I have to do it, right? But
yeah, okay.
So the one of the great problems of spiritual life is that people don't mix these orders. So that in functional life and Dharma, I have to be responsive and I've got to look at my conduct and all of that sort of stuff. I am talking about this longing to be with God, which is only satisfied by God. In that department, I surrender my will and I surrender my thinking and my actions.
Yeah.
Right? But in the area of conduct, of course I don't. But they're two different orders and they always get mixed up. You get these spiritual loonies who say, oh, I'm just going to let go. Well, that's lovely, right? That's confusing the orders. But then you have the other ones that they're so intent on functional living, they don't realize that they must do this other one. Do you know what I mean? Right? So that's the difference. Was that clearer?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. All right. And we will see you next week. And look after yourselves. Bye-bye.
Good week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bede.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andre.
Bye.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye-bye.